Premier Perrottet, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure, Andrew.
There were 49 deaths in New South Wales from COVID yesterday. How many deaths can we expect this year from COVID?
Well, I think it's obviously too early to tell, but if you look at where the case numbers are going forward, whilst they're coming down, they're certainly plateauing. But what's mostly important for us here in our state is a continued focus on our hospitalisations and ICUs. We've invested significant amounts, not just prior to the pandemic, but over the last 10 years to increase our capacity in our hospital system, in our ICU system. And so far we are tracking here in our state well within our best case scenario.
Okay, but let me just get to this point, because I have asked several politicians this, your predecessor, the Chief Health Officer, never quite get an answer. Let me put a figure to you. Normally flu and pneumonia is 3,000 to 4,000 deaths a year in a bad season. We're looking at 10,000 this year?
Well, I guess what is a concern coming forward is from our health team is we expect flu to come back into the country this year. And what we're seeing around the world with Omicron, and what we would expect is that we potentially will have further waves as we move through. And if we are plateauing in numbers on hospitalisations and ICUs, then when we do look at those death numbers, we would see them to sit around that mark for some time, particularly if our hospitalisations and ICUs stay in that stable number. But we've also got to prepare for what could be a difficult flu season as we head into the winter months.
So that's just something we have to live with. We talk about living with the virus.
Well, this is the new world, and we would expect those numbers to stay pretty consistent. And as flu comes in, those challenges will continue to be with us. But as you say, we've also had very difficult years in the past. I think the 2017 flu season was a particularly challenging one for our state here. And going forward, that will continue to put pressure on the health system as we move through this next phase of the pandemic.
All right, removing the mask mandate December 15, that was a mistake by you, wasn't it?
I don't think so. We've always said in our state throughout the entire 2 years, we look at the evidence that's in front of us, we find a balance between the health impacts, the economic impacts, the mental health issues, and we tailor our settings.
But hang on, how did taking off masks affect mental health?
No, I'm saying there's a broad array of issues that we look at when we make those decisions, and whether that's the QR code.
Okay, but you knew Omicron was spreading more. I remember having you on Sunday Agenda last December and saying, hang on a minute, Boris Johnson is even putting masks on people. Wasn't it a mistake in hindsight?
Well, look at Boris Johnson's now removing masks when they have high case numbers. So you can look around the world and look at different situations at points in time. Let's just take a step back in relation to that decision as well. We went from highly recommending masks to mandating masks over a week's period. So, we will move to a position of personal responsibility. Our job is to take the community with us, to learn to live alongside the virus.
So could we see masks go this year?
We'll work through that. We'll work through those issues. I mean, it's still very early days with Omicron as we go through. It's pleasing to see where the trend is, but we'll continue to adjust our settings. What we'd like to do is provide certainty in relation to the settings that are in place, and not try and chop and change those settings on a weekly basis. We try and provide as much confidence and continuity in relation to those settings. At the moment, we're pretty consistent. We've extended those for the next month. The QR codes, the 2 square metre rule, those types of provisions are in place, are a cautious approach for the state to take as we move through this next phase. But as we get to the end of February, we'll make some further adjustments again.
So now we're being told to get our boosters. Could we have to get boosters every 4 to 6 months indefinitely? Where does this end?
Well, we don't know yet. Obviously, we're trying to get the booster campaign going here in our state. We've got about 40% of the eligible population who have received boosters here in New South Wales. Now, when we moved that's dropped a bit because we moved that interval from 4 months to 3 months. But we know it's very clear on the evidence, not just here but around the world, that boosters are key to keeping you safe. And if you look at the hospitalisations, it's certainly clear that those who've had a booster shot are in a much better position than those who haven't.
Is it possible then? I mean, it seems logical. We then need to get a booster every 4 to 6 months.
Well, we don't know that. Well, we don't know that yet, but Andrew, also, many people take the flu shot every year as well. That just becomes part of our daily lives. And this is the thing, we talk about living alongside the virus. We've talked about it for 2 years. That means there's going to be challenges along the way. It's a bit of a different world than we have seen in the past. But many people across the country go out and get a flu shot every year. I think there'll be obviously a greater importance in doing that as we're living alongside the virus. And I think we'll eventually get to a point where we start taking it more seriously, let's say, about when you're sick, you stay at home. Going and getting those booster shots are important as well. So I think it'll be a different world as we go through than we have in the past. But I think people will be taking those types of issues a little bit more seriously than we have over the years before.
So you're making this JobSaver announcement.
Yeah.
Why do you think Scott Morrison didn't want to be part of this?
Look, I mean, as a former treasurer, I've always advocated for some federal funding as we've gone through the Omicron and the Delta and the Alpha variants in the past. And there were more challenging times before, right? When we were going into lockdowns here in our state and around the country, and the very difficult, for all leaders, because those decisions you were making to close businesses, we saw many people lose their jobs. Now we're going through a next phase now, but there's no doubt over that summer period when Omicron was obviously taking off, that confidence dropped and many businesses suffered. So we put this package out, we're announcing it today, and I think that will provide that support for businesses who had a very difficult January. And we want to make sure, and we've always said in our state, that we'll put businesses and workers before the budget. That's been our success in New South Wales over the last 2 years. When we come through all of this, I want to make sure that we've kept everyone in work, we've kept businesses open, and the strength of the New South Wales budget position and our economy going into this pandemic has allowed us to ensure that we can invest to get everyone through.
Yeah, but why hasn't Scott Morrison come at it? I mean, particularly because he's got an election on the way.
Well, that's really a matter for them to make a decision on. I know our Treasurer has been in contact with...
What's your understanding as to their reasons?
I don't have an understanding, but what I know is that from a state's perspective, we will always provide that financial support to have businesses back, to keep people in work. It's not just a health pandemic in terms of those issues. It's also one that affects businesses and affects the economy. Now, from a New South Wales perspective, I want to use our fiscal strength to get businesses through. I look at the last 2 years and the fact that our hospital system is in a strong position, that we've kept people in work, we've kept the economy going. That's what success looks like. And yes, as we move through, there'll be less requirement for financial need. But when I look at the data that I've seen, when I look at some of the challenges we've had with businesses over the summer break, it makes perfect sense from my perspective to provide that support to businesses this time around.
All right, well, let me ask you briefly, because we're nearly out of time, just a couple of things. But first of all, won't there come a structural adjustment time where indoor venues like cinemas, an example, just depart the scene? Is that what Scott Morrison's maybe looking at?
In what way?
Well, more businesses will have to close because of the nature of the virus and the way we have to live with it. Or do we see government support every time there's a wave?
Well, that's a very good question, and we've tailored this package to ensure that it supported those businesses who were doing it tough over the summer months. But I do believe if we get the booster program rolled out, what we are seeing with Omicron is one that's highly contagious but less severe. And I think the public, as we move through, will adjust their behaviour. We're already seeing that across our state, and I'm incredibly confident here in our state that all our businesses will get through. And this will hopefully be probably the last time we need to provide that financial support. But it's important. But Andrew,
it's important. You saying that in months to come. Let's have a see.
Yeah, but Andrew, I'll make the point that if there's a need there, we will support it. That's been our approach over 2 years, and that's not going to change.
Okay, just finally, are you expecting a bloody nose at the by-elections of February 12th?
Well, by-elections are always challenging for any government, but ultimately what I'm focused on is getting our state through the pandemic and looking after the health system, looking after our businesses and keeping people in work. That's my focus day in, day out. By-elections will be by-elections.
Dominic Perrottet, thanks for your time.
Thanks, mate.